cabs. Always moving, never stopping. Tireless carriages taking us where we need to go, where we need to be. They are everywhere. We whistle them down, call them at all hours. They are so common, they're practically invisible. So many, it's hard to believe there are only 500 of them on our streets. But where did they come from? Have you ever wondered who started Duffy's in Unicity? Did you know cab companies like Moores, Yellow, Black and White, Diamond, Grosvenor, Star, Sargent, and many more roamed the streets years ago? So how do we tell you about a history that has largely been unwritten?
Taxi!
Hi, I'm Laurie Mustard. And for this kind of look back, we're going to have to catch a cab. Literally. So are you ready to go back?
Where to, ma'am?
Downtown, please. But don't take Portage this time of the day. Just go down to Ellis or...
Pretty spiffy, eh?
Is this a joke, or...?
Downtown Winnipeg it is.
Oh, wait, am I on TV? Oh, my gosh.
Oh, this isn't a good idea.
Better hang on, ma'am.
Hang on for what?
She's gonna wish she had a seatbelt. Winnipeg in the 1800s was booming like no other. It was destined to become the epicenter for the continent's commerce, manufacturing, and railways. The turn of the century boom would see the city virtually rise out of the prairie into a modern metropolis of the day. Not bad for a settlement built on the back of the famous Red River cart. Remember reading about those in history class? Now, you might be wondering what this has to do with cab history, but a city with a swelling population, all needing to get where they were going, needed liveries for all those horses and carriages. Okay, cue our little reenactment. You can tell we're going for a silent movie kind of thing here. You'll get the idea. Liveries were the logical place to start a carriage service, and once again, Winnipeg was no different than any other city. Many had come from the livery businesses in the east and did what they knew best. Like our two here, there were many names like William Harvey, Jack Benson, Michael Connell, Redmond Burke, William Jordan, who saw the opportunity in Winnipeg.
Very few people in Winnipeg could afford to have their own transportation. Unless you were really a horse person and had a job that allowed you the time to look after a horse, you had to hire somebody to do that for you. So not very many people were in that position. You know, not much public transportation around. It was pretty restricted to the main arteries. That's mainly where the cab business came from. Cabs that took people places, but they operated from a livery stable. So they'd rent out vehicles and horses, and if you didn't know how to drive, they'd send a driver along with you because they wanted their property protected. They didn't want you putting a horse into the barbed wire into the ditch.
Oh yeah, kinda looks like my first date. Contrary to what the movies would have us believe, not everyone in the New West knew how to handle horses, let alone buggies. So, to protect their investment and keep costs down, livery owners provided drivers, especially to someone like Marv here, who clearly should have one. Besides, with droves of immigrants pouring out of the CN and CP stations daily, there was no shortage of candidates who saw the cabbie job as a way to start a new life. Well, that's a nice sign. But with so many looking for work, the job hunt back in 1872 could get a little competitive. It looks like Mitch thinks he's going to give it a go. Oh, wait a minute. This hapless sap appears determined to get the job. Mitch, you better go. This could be historical. Now, even in these early years, with countless liveries popping up, the success rate was low. So that meant drivers had to have some savvy and sense of customer service. They had to dress appropriately, exude some class, and procure the company image. After all, the city's upper crust were top customers for the livery cab trade, but the job could sometimes be a stinky one, literally. Our sap is not exactly putting his best foot forward, is he? The Manitoba Free Press always had editorials complaining about the horses messing up downtown, to put it politely. So drivers who could perform the best customer service usually got the job, while others did the not-so-nice jobs. But don't worry, our hapless sap gets his chance because the cab trade was about to change, and all because of one man's innovative thinking. But while the livery owners were looking for a way to make bigger profits, a young David Landrigan back in 1872 found a better way. What if he just parked outside the hotel and didn't have to rely on telephone bookings? He would be the first to start the street cab, the first to start a real taxi stand, and make Winnipeg a two-tier cab town.
Cab for hire. Any person desiring to hire a cab to any part of the town of Winnipeg can find me at the stand in front of the Davis Hotel. David Landrigan.
He set up his cab business, and it didn't last very long, mainly because the established livery stables could do everything he did, plus offer a bunch of other services. Winnipeg had doubled in population. There was 3,000 people, so then I guess it was just about a viable business. And he was the first, and he had no competitors, so he was able to keep going. And then, of course, Winnipeg kept expanding, so his market expanded.
Imagine what it would have been like for owners like Harvey and Benson, trying to squeeze every nickel of profit they could out of their business, to find out this David Landrigan, just parked in front of the hotel, could pick up fares, even more than one. The cab trade was never a windfall business, but this was an opportunity they were quick to seize on. They could just hire street cabbies and double their profits, eventually forcing Landrigan right out of his little sideline business. But the two-tier cab industry was here to stay. The oldest cabbie on record in Winnipeg was Charles Wedley, who was well into his 80s before he parked his cab in 1966.
George Wedley, the guy who drove through the bank window, or got pushed through the bank window, he started off as a jitney driver. And once the jitneys were banned, he banded together with about 35 other jitney drivers, and they started the dispatch taxi company.
A two-tier system was simply two modes of service differentiated under one governing body. The distinction was that livery cabs could only dispatch to booked appointments, while street cabs could be hailed from taxi stands. So, numbering street cabs was instituted, and not only divided the two services, but would become a social statement as well. The upper class did not hail cabs that were numbered. Oh, and here's our bossy fare. She doesn't seem to be enjoying her trip into the past. Our sap certainly has the right idea. Service with a smile. And a blanket at the ready, as they often did. We all know what the winters are like here, so imagine what it was like to ride a carriage back then. Oh, brother. She probably doesn't even realize that's not a time-traveling cab. Oh well, on with our trip. It was around this time that Ham McMicken bought a livery from two owners, Michael Connell and Redmond Burke, who were looking to get out of the trade. Ham was born into wealth and accumulated more with his steamboat, omnibus, and transfer businesses, not to mention a monopoly on handling all CPR freight coming into Winnipeg.
And by that time, he had established the Northwest Omnibus and Transfer Company. So that was McMicken's first foray into the cab business. And he bought the Connell and Burke stable because it was as close as he could get to the train station, which was across the river in St. Boniface.
Looks like our hapless sap is down on his luck, working the poop pail again. He's really not having an easy time of it. But what you don't know is he's lost his street cab job. It was difficult for liveries to be both the street cab and livery cab service. They were both regarded very differently, with street cabs looked down upon.
Feature of the street cab as opposed to the livery cab was that you had numbers painted on the side lamps. They'd be on the outsides of the side lamps in 3-inch letters, which doesn't sound very conspicuous to us, but to anybody wanting a cab, that was quite an indication that what you'd got was a street cab, and got to the point where respectable people didn't want to ride in one. Somebody like Bardal, who ran the funeral business and also operated cabs, his livery cabs would be used in funerals, so they had to be kept up in pretty good shape.
For McMicken, the street cab did not appeal to him. It was bottom rung anyway, many complaining of them just being red light district cabs. And McMicken was definitely a man with a reputation to consider, so he did away with the street cab service and concentrated on posh livery carriages to service his well-to-do clientele. By 1882, Ham abandoned the company to form the Manitoba Cartage and Warehousing Company, selling to Bill Squires, one of his employees. Squires tried his hand at both livery and street cabs, but would only last a couple of years as he did not have the political connections that basically lifeboated McMicken. The Winnipeg boom collapsed, and many, like our hapless sap, would have to find something better to make a living. By 1886, Squires sold delivery back to Connell and Burke. Times were tough, jobs not as easy as they were. But one thing was for sure, Winnipeg was a two-tier town, and this would be the blueprint of the industry. But the auto was coming to Winnipeg, and the horse liveries would quickly make way for auto liveries. The cab trade would never be the same.
Okay, can we go back now?
Just a couple more stops. Ma'am.
Don't call me Matt. Oh, no. No, 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 no.
No one said time travel was easy.
Charles Dublin Dan James was one of the more popular livery cab drivers back in 1910 and one of the last before automobiles overran the city. But Dublin was a man of flair and panache. His wedding carriage was all the rage and turned him into something of a society column celebrity. With business partner William Jordan, he would forge a healthy business, also using innovative use of the telephone, setting up several telephone stands throughout the city. After a short-lived venture in hotels, he came back to the cab industry and earned a reputation as a gregarious marketer, promoting all kinds of services for his livery business, the most popular being a wedding carriage that made him a local celebrity, especially among the well-to-do brides who just had to have his carriage, more so when one considered it would most definitely guarantee a mention in the society column. But if there was one enemy for Dan, it was one he shared with all livery owners trying to hang on in the Industrial Revolution. The day of horse and buggy were quickly coming to an end. Much like our hapless sap's chances at a happy ever after wedding, both were doomed, you could say. Regardless of how unique his service was to the industry was shifting to gasoline engines, as was the rest of the world. Dan was the last of the liveries to hold out, but the auto forced their horses to the curb. He passed in 1911, and the city and the cab trade lost one of its icons whose passing suggested the end of an era.
Welcome to another edition of Funny Cabbie Stories, starring our very own time-traveling cabbie, Mitch, with guest stars the inept 5 bank robbers. In 1921, one of the most inept bank robberies in our city's history took place from the back of a cab. 5 bank robbers, while being driven out to Ely, Manitoba, plotted their heist in the back seat. 5 robbers and 1 gun. They were hardly prepared. But somewhere along the way, they realized the cabbie had overheard the whole plot. They threw him out and stole his cab. They bumbled through the robbery, then made off with the loot. Meanwhile, all the cabbie had to do was make it to a phone, tell the Mounties what he knew. He was able to give them the location the robbers were planning to go to divvy up the money. The robbers must have thought they really pulled it off until they drove right into a roadblock, exactly where the cabbie had overheard them say. They really were the inept five. Get your hands up!
Now, as humorous as this story was, crimes against cabbies is no laughing matter.
Where to now, ma'am?
Edge of town, and don't call me ma'am.
Arthur Badger was an affable, independent cabbie. At 60, he was edging towards retirement. But fate would have a different plan for Badger. 5 a.m., Friday morning, September 28, 1945. Badger picked up 2 fares that morning. They wanted to be driven out to the remote area of St. James. There had been a spree of cab robberies in recent weeks, and one could only speculate Badger must have felt concerned with such a rural destination in the wee hours. According to police reports, Badger had finally stopped and demanded his fare. There, they attacked, ruthlessly beating the elderly cabbie. Badger suffered a dozen lacerations to his head, a pierced cheek, and broken right hand, and was found barely alive in a ditch. He would die several days later in hospital. But Badger's murder would infuriate and frustrate the cab trade, as well as the authorities, and would go unsolved even to this day. Six months after Badger's killing, a second murder would shock the cab trade yet again. But this one would grip the nation's headlines in one of the most sordid and controversial trials in Canadian crime history. It was a Sunday morning, March 31st, 1946, when Johan Johnson's bloody body was discovered just south of the city. The 43-year-old Icelander, who had been a United taxi driver since 1937, would mark cab history by becoming the spark to the safety issue. His funeral would be a front-page affair with over 300 cabbies in the cortege. But who committed the crime? The police investigation would lead them to the door of Helen Berard, and eventually to a suspect. Lawrence Deacon's arrest ignited cabbies' anger for swift justice. And that would have been the case if not for Berard's sensational testimony that would make her and Deacon famous and all but fade the memory of the victim, Johan Johnson. But what happened that night? How did Johan happen upon Deacon and Berard? Helen Berard testified that Deacon was at a party she had hosted earlier that night. She claimed Deacon flirted with her openly throughout the evening, and then later, after several drunken quarrels with her husband, she left the house sometime around 3 a.m. She would later testify that she and Deacon had prearranged to get a cab and go to Deacon's apartment. There had been a strong attraction between them. What triggered the attack of Johnson was never disclosed. Yet Berard's scattered testimony crucified Deacon with her account of a savage, deranged attack. She said she somehow got out of the cab, horrified and unable to stop what was happening. She later recanted, claimed the killer was not Deacon, but a mysterious man who shared her cab. Many would doubt Deacon's guilt by the time he was hanged. But as a result of Johnson's murder, the Manitoba Taxi Board would make safety a primary mandate. The matter of shields is still argued, even today. The longest cab ride in Winnipeg history? That would go to George Wallach, who back in April of 1971 drove a young man and his ailing father all the way to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, through one of the worst blizzards of the year. Outstanding. Whoa! Well, we hope you enjoyed our little cab ride back into the past. How about you, Mitch? Did you enjoy the trip?
I suppose. I lost the girl again.
Again, you lost the girl again.
I keep losing the girl.
Oh, man.
You think we could go to the future next time?
Why not? We're in a cab. Catch you next time.